So I've just got about sort of 15 or 20 sheets of paper. It shouldn't take too long. But it's so I thought tonight, if I started off sort of talking about almost like kind of consumer behaviour, how consumer behaviour has changed, and from that, how shopping has changed, and how shopping isn't like it used to be anymore. And if you kind of excuse the visual pun, also actually looking at how it is, though, very much open all hours these days, and how that has fundamental changes to things. We're constantly kind of told that how much we're sort of bombarded with communications these days. The ever-increasing amount of not just marketing communications, but also, there's tweets, there's status updates, there's posts, there's texts, and there's calls from friends. And although we're getting so much more information, and we're having to consume so much more information, and I think this, coupled with the kind of the ease of connection that comes from sort of social and digital, means that there's been a fundamental shift in the way that consumers do and can interact with brands and also then retail. And I think when we talk about this shift in behaviour, we often, especially from agencies and the people that work within marketing, almost talk about it as in the fact that control has now shifted. There's been this balance of power shift, and now consumers are in control now. And I think it's all based on this idea that previously consumers didn't have control. They didn't have control over what they bought, and that it was us, the brands, that kind of forced these decisions on them. And years after kind of a painful struggle, they finally kind of wrestled control away from the evil corporations, which is us, and then now that the brands are kind of enslaved to this newly empowered public. And I think whilst we definitely do need to look at kind of changing and evolving how we talk to consumers and how we sell to consumers, I think almost the mistake that this makes, this idea of control, is that it assumes that consumers were actually actively engaged with brands in the first place, that they actually largely and as a mass kind of care about what we say and care about what we do. And it's this idea that I think it's a sad fact for all of us sort of working in advertising and marketing that really the vast majority of the public and the vast majority of people that we're selling to and that we'd like to sell to are kind of at best indifferent about us. And I don't think that's saying that advertising isn't working. It certainly isn't saying there's anything wrong with the product. It's just that we're living in a much more sort of complex world now where we are bombarded with information. And really the only way to navigate through that, you can't respond to everything you see and every sign you see and every whatever it is. The only way to deal with that is to kind of filter that information and only really respond to those that are directly relevant to you. You do get these people, and there are these, I think weirdos that will, they'll queue up all night to buy the latest Apple products. They'll get Harley Davidson tattooed on their arse, or they'll only drink Coca-Cola morning, noon, and night. And these people do exist, but I think the majority of the consumers aren't like this. They're largely passive. Most people, really don't really think about you very often. They don't know that much about you, and actually probably they don't even buy you that often. With most of the sales portfolio coming from lots of infrequent buyers, and it's really kind of these kind of brand loyalists or nutters that make up quite a tiny proportion of the overall sales base. And I think because of this, it's wrong to kind of assume that consumers have or even want control over this kind of relationship with brands. And instead, for me, I think the real impact of this increased connectivity we have is that it just makes it easier for us to find out what we want and when we want it. And I think almost from this is this idea that consumers, I don't know if anyone's seen Wall-E, but yeah. I was trying to find it lazy. What's lazy? But for me, the idea that consumers are lazy, and not in a bad sense, just that they effectively want to do what's easiest. Yeah, and why wouldn't you? It's almost like kind of water flowing downhill. You're going to go with the path of least resistance. And so I don't think technology is necessarily giving consumers control. It's more that it's just made it easier for us to navigate the huge amount of brands that are out there for us. It's made it easier to find out what we want, when we want to buy it, and also it's made it easier for us to find it at the best price. So what does this all mean for retail? Well, I think these innovations has led to kind of these three converging forces that sort of changed the way that we shop and consequently the role of retail in the store. 24/7 connectivity, now we can find out whatever we want, whenever we want it, and we can shop at whatever time of the day we want. The Google mindset, we research things to death now before we buy it. We can compare and we can contrast. And crucially, in terms of social media, it's changed kind of the point of reference that we get in terms of the information that we pull in that influences that purchase decision. Now it's kind of, we're less reliant on the views of the manufacturer now. We're more able to access the information of our peer group, and perhaps people have less of a vested interest in telling you how brilliant something might be. So 90% of trusty opinions of friends who've used the product, 70% trust opinions posted online, even if they're complete strangers. And I think consequently, because of this, the decision-making process for actually how you shop and how you buy has changed. And whereas before you would go into a shop and you would make a lot of these decisions within those four walls, now you can go away and you can research elsewhere, you can compare and you can make those decisions. So most of that decision-making process is actually now made outside of the store. And from that, I think consumers are moving away from, this is a kind of an example of what we call, the traditional purchase funnel, quite a linear journey. I'm not sure if it was ever this simple, but it's, it kind of illustrates the point. And I think now we're moving into, and forgive the kind of horrible planary term of ecosystem of shopper touchpoints. I think what that means is it's random, and it's quite hard to work out where people are going to be and what they're going to do. But I think the key thing is, why go to a shop when it's easier and cheaper to buy it online? Why buy one brand when you can get the same brand slightly cheaper, or you can get more for the same money? People are going to choose whatever channel suits them best, suits their needs best. That might be a store, it might not be a store. And the challenge for retailers and brands now is really how to influence that, how to get in, to be there at the right point, at the right time, and the right point of this ever-changing journey in order to influence those purchase decisions. So when we talk about the state of retail, we often talk about kind of, the dying high streets, price wars as kind of partly resulting from this sort of technological and behavioural shift. But I think it's probably important at this point to kind of inject or introduce a little bit of realism to it. And I think it's mainly because we like this. We like a bit of melodrama as people and as marketing, as marketeers. We're always talking about the death of something. It's the death of it's the TV. It's the death of advertising. Last week, the chief executive of M&C Saatchi, probably someone that should probably know better, announced that A, ideas were dead, B, creativity was dead, and C, strategy was dead. Right? Yeah, because that's not all the three things that you do. You find it quite baffling, and it's largely seems to be this death of everything. Largely seems to be through social media, which is almost some sort of like communications wrecking ball or assassin. It just like kills everything in its way. And now it's the time of retail, and it's the death of the high street now. And things like e-commerce has grown exponentially in recent years, but it's important to remember that it still only accounts for less than 5% of total retail transactions. And whilst the fact that consumers now can choose channels which better meet their needs than having to go down to the high street, I think it's important to remember that shops are suffering because there's been a global financial meltdown and people have less money, rather than the fact that they can follow their favourite toilet paper on Facebook. It's linked, but it's not the main factor. I think that we do need to look at how we can reinvigorate retail and how we can sort of better meet the needs of our customers. We can't now kind of expect them to listen to us, to watch us, to visit us, or to buy simply because we're there. Probably not that we ever could, but I think we need to work much harder to get their attention, and we really need to kind of show them the type of loyalty that we would probably have expected from them. And technology has undoubtedly changed parts of consumer behaviour, but rather than kind of seeing this as a threat, how can we embrace this to do what successful retailers have always done, which is create mutually engaging and beneficial relationships, giving them what they want when they want it. So I have a few quite broad brush strategies for how we can hopefully achieve that. The first one, stand for something. and that sort of stand for something that isn't necessarily just price. And for me, this is probably the most important one. It's really just to tell people what you're all about. Why should somebody be interested in you? Why should somebody come to visit you or to buy you? It's now so easy to get involved with brands, and I think with that ease of connection, there's a danger that we can kind of spread relationships quite thinly. We become a bit less engaged with each activity. Our relationships with people and with brands, there's more breadth than depth. This whole idea that you can have, sort of 1,000 friends on Facebook, you can't have a meaningful relationship with 1,000 people. And I think what illustrates this is things like perhaps Groupon and Living Social. They can work very well with other sort of price promotions as footfall drivers, but there's also a danger that they create an offer culture where we're constantly looking for, because they offer things at such a massively discounted price, we're constantly sort of flicking from deal to deal, moving from brand to brand, product to product. We never are prepared to pay full retail price, and it means that retailers and brands are often then sort of competing on an ever decreasing price rather than quality. And I think because of this, it's perhaps never been more important to actually have a point of view on something, but I think by standing for something that isn't price related and for actually having a point of view on the world, you're more likely to attract people that kind of share that vision with you. It's got a few examples for each of these. The first one for me, and I love this example, obviously Sainsbury's. We're living in a recession, and people know in a recession you've got to cut back. But cutting back doesn't have to mean that's what Tesco are doing, where it's about cutting prices, it's about value, it's about sort of 10% off coupons. I kind of think it's the genius really of what Sainsbury's have done with Live Well for Less, is that they've made you feel good about cutting back, and that cutting back doesn't have to mean that it's bad, that you can still provide for your family, and that kind of everything's still going to be okay and carry on as usual. Another quick example for me is Nike, and specifically Nike running. For lots of runners, Nike isn't necessarily always thought of as a serious running shoe, and runners sort of naturally, when they start running more, go, I need to get some Asics. And Nike's seen a bit more of a fashion brand and a bit less serious. And I love what they do here, is that they take this van and they go to where their audience are, to where serious runners are, to the routes that they run and to the races that they race, and are there just to allow them to use their trainers, to try their goods, just to say, we're as passionate about this as you are. So next one, show them some love. I think by having this point of view and a genuine purpose kind of helps kind of create a bit of an attraction and sort of helps you sort of bring consumers in. But for that to turn into genuine loyalty and to get people coming back to us, we need to give them something more. There needs to be much more sort of a compelling content, and we need to add value and basically make it better for them. And especially as we're living in financial uncertainty and austerity, if we're to base something on a promise that isn't price, we need to give something back. There needs to be a genuine value exchange that is lasting and beneficial. I've got a really simple example of this, which is IKEA in Denmark. I love this because it's just so simple. Lots of people cycle in Denmark, and specifically in Copenhagen, and they realised that a barrier to purchase was that you can't cycle to IKEA and take home anything that's even particularly bulky. So what do? They either allow you to rent a trailer to put onto your bike to take home that bulky good, or you can rent the bike and the trailer. It's really simple, but it just makes the whole experience a bit nicer. Third one, style and substance. Consumers now have such a massive variety of brands and products to choose from, and I think importantly now, all products kind of work pretty well. Consumer choice used to be based much more on about the performance of it and the reliability of it. But things work now. So, we used to sell cars on the fact that they didn't rust. So, well, good. I'm not going to buy it just for that reason. And so, I think if we are going to get people interested and we are going to create that loyalty and create the right sort of memories about what the brand is and why you should invest time or your money in this, there needs to be much more of almost like amusing and sort of entertaining people, and much more of a balance between style and substance. I picked a slightly sort of off-kilter example here. It's a favourite of mine. I love cycling, but I think it's a really good example of this style and substance. As some of you, or many of you might know, there's been a massive explosion in the popularity of cycling in recent years. And so much so there's actually a new sort of socio-demographic group called Mammals, which is middle-aged men in Lycra. I think their natural habitat is the hills on Sunday mornings in bright, ill-fitting Lycra. But what I mean, yeah. But I think for me, what's so nice about this is that lots of other brands are obviously sort of catering for this increasing market, but most of them, not all of them, focus on the sort of the functionality of the product. It's how dry it will keep you, how breathable it is, how it won't chafe certain bits. But what Rafa realised was that there is a group of cyclists that they just expect that the product's going to work, but they want to look and they want to feel good on their bike as well. It doesn't have to be sort of day glow, fluorescent Lycra. So they created this brand where it evokes all the kind of the classic imagery of cycling and why lots of people are into cycling, the classic climbs, the classic rides. It's quite sort of evocative photography, and we obviously create some fantastic products as well. There's an example here of their cycling store. They do sell bikes as well, and it doesn't look like your standard cycling store. It's a lot more style there. Critics at Rafa say it's all puffery, it's rubbish, but actually they have a very big market of people that are willing to pay a little bit more for this. Also, their online experience as well. I mean, kind of the shop and the online retail experience completely exemplify everything that the brand is about. It's about kind of giving you sort of fantastic films. It's kind of members-only races and kind of meetups. Fantastic apps where you can find out who is interested in riding near you and needs someone to go out riding with. It's also a great example of commercial success. They look like they've been going for years and years. They've only been going for less than 10. And only 3 years ago, they basically poached the global marketing director of Nike in the US. They're absolutely taking off. And I think it's because they knew their market and they knew what they needed to do. Second to last, it's nearly done. Create an experience. So I think with the convergence of got the mobile, social, and digital, kind of the role of the store has changed. We don't need to go into the store to make the majority of those purchase decisions. So it has a sort of a shifting role dependent on that particular customer. But I think the commonality across all of it is that stores now can't just focus purely on sales. They need to offer much more of an experience that kind of really sort of drives home what the brand is all about and what the product is all about. This whole idea of kind of shots for trying, online for buying. It's quite simplistic, but it kind of gets across the message of that idea of sort of trial and going actually to see what it's about, whereas necessarily having that sort of hard sell when you walk through the door. Apple, are an obvious example of this, and for that reason I'm not going to use them. But another perhaps sort of less obvious example is Abercrombie and Fitch, the retailer. You might like this, you might not. But whether you do or you don't, it doesn't really matter. But these kind of sort of shirtless beefcakes are there outside every store. What they do is drive massive footfall because people want to have their photo taken for them. But also importantly, they completely sort of exemplify an aspirational all-American brand, and obviously the clothing does that as well. A second example, on sort of a smaller scale, is sort of the recipes, sort of Jamie Oliver cookery shop. There are stores now in sort of Clapham and Brighton. It's obviously a cookery shop. You can go in there, you can buy pots and pans and cookery books and other cookery things. I'm not a big cook. What you can also do, which kind of brings home what the Jamie Oliver brand is all about. You can go in there and actually cook. You can go in there and try things, and there's ingredients in there, and all under the watchful eye of trained chefs who are going to give you hints and advice. It's all about the Jamie Oliver making cooking accessible. And then finally, social connectivity. Now I've talked a lot today about sort of social and the impact in social, and I think I just wanted to almost end on the fact that we perhaps shouldn't forget the real social benefit of retail and high streets in general. People, they tweet, they poke, they upload, they share, they interact, but they do that not because of the technology, it's because they want to connect with people. And we're social animals and we like having contact with people. Virtually, yes, but I think there's also a need for not to forget the face-to-face and the fact that people like being around people. High streets are suffering brands are finding it harder to get people's attention and to get them to come on board and to purchase them. So I think we do need to embrace this idea of social connectivity, but importantly, that it lives on and offline as well. And sort of social spaces where it's in or out of store, it's on the phones, or it's just face-to-face, that allows people to better experience the brand and better understand what it's all about, why you should buy it and why you should recommend it to other people as well. And that's me.
Thank you very much for having us to your wonderful offices here. It's the first time I've been here. I hope you like getting a bit tipsy. I hope you like cold buffets, and I hope you like this presentation. What we're going to look at is just the future of the high street, what we're seeing at Mintel, things we're seeing happening around the world, examples of where we think the high street might go, and some suggestions to close on some ideas we have, and hopefully that leads to some discussions about what we all think might work, what might not work. So in terms of what we're going to look at, this has been acknowledged, there are some problems for high street retailing. Some of that is connected, in some people's opinion, to online retail. We're also going to look at the need to create something more experiential. Can we create destination retail, something which is a cross between retail and leisure? I apologise for that dreadful phrase, street tail. That's really looking at how, as people become more connected on the go, as we're accessing the internet on our phones, on our tablets rather than at home, what does that mean for retail? What opportunities does that present? We'll look at how consumers are changing, how rises in urbanisation, rises in commuting are sort of creating a sort of generation of transhumers. We have to target them on the go and sell to them on the go. And we'll look at the issue of service. Do people want, the speed and convenience of automation, or do they want a sort of genuine level of human interaction? And we'll look at burgeoning rental culture as well and ask, is sort of retail itself as a concept in danger? Is there more opportunity perhaps in a lot of retailers switching to a rental model? So let's start by looking at some of the difficulties high street retailing in particular is facing. Now, this is quite a small stat, but I think it's quite a telling thing though. A lot of people are concerned that, one of the problems of high street retail is it's just everything looks the same. You've got the ubiquitous chains, there's not a lot of variation either between brands or in regards to independence on offer. And the internet definitely is an issue here. Obviously, virtually, I think every retailer has an online proposition and a bricks and mortar proposition. Even Amazon's exploring this now. But 63% of consumers we speak to at Mintel say that browsing online has, reduced the amount of time they're spending in stores. And when we talk to our consumers in the States, the reaction is this is simply just a much more efficient way of going about your shopping business. It removes hassle, saves time, and time is really of the essence. And when we ask consumers about whether they are actually drawn to, I'm not picking on Birmingham here, if consumers are actually drawn to, department stores by the buzz of the events they're creating, that response, I think, is really, really disappointing. There's a lot more stores can do, I think, to engage with people, beyond normal hours, during normal hours. Christmas is always a good indicator. It's a very sort of emotive purchasing period in terms of what we're thinking about. We're looking for inspiration on what to buy. And I think the fact that, the internet's got the majority here is also very telling and sort of, a bit something of a failure on the part of high street propositions. Now, where engaging, with physical products always does succeed is when we sort of ask people about spending on big ticket items. So not only cars, but housewares and things like that, furnishings, and clothing to a degree really produces a strong response in terms of people wanting to engage, connect, touch things in store. And as I say, this is particularly true of fashion. When we speak to younger consumers, this stat's actually from one of our American reports, but the statistics we have for the UK, very similar. When it becomes apparel and footwear, people want to really do enjoy shopping in physical stores. And part of this is because of the experiential factor. So again, consumers do say that they find shopping to be a social activity and one that they really enjoy. So let's look at destination retail. What can we do to make something more experiential, more of an attraction? Now, when I've shown this, sometimes people have sniggered at this because this is a Camden Market in London, which is actually, become quite a sort of tacky proposition in many ways. But I think it is the second or third biggest tourist attraction in London, so they're doing something right from a retail perspective. So we really want to look at some examples of destination retail and what we've seen various people doing around the world to try and do this. So Carrefour's a nice example. They've tried to prolong dwell time in stores, get people to spend more time in stores by giving them more options, more reasons to spend more time there. So they're doing live cooking lessons, as we discussed in Jamie Oliver's stores. Also adding hairdressing salons and nurseries as well to sort of give people more reasons to visit, prolong dwell time, make it a less testing experience. And this store, a Weatherproof's flagship store in New York City, they've taken a sort of switch-off approach. They want to make their store a home from home, somewhere you want to spend time, somewhere you want to socialise. So what they're doing, they're actually embracing this sort of digital detox movement by getting people to surrender their phones when they go into the shop. Now, obviously, all the cynics amongst us will think, well, this is really just to stop people making any price comparisons in store. But it really is about getting people to focus on the retail experience and treating the retail experience as something precious and something which is more akin to a leisure experience. Some good examples we're going to look at now from Asia, an example from Japan. They really kind of maximize the idea of the shop window. The shop window is really important. When we talk about online versus offline, in many regards, it doesn't really matter if you're selling in the shop. The shop is a shop window, as long as they're buying from you. Now, this department store, Takashimaya, has taken a very high-tech route to trying to attract people. And this is a Valentine's Day campaign. I'll be interested to see how alluring you find this. This is taking a whole new approach to the idea of window dressing and what you can do with mannequins. So they're taking a very sort of high-tech approach to sort of create buzz, create talking points. Now, I think, judging by people's faces, that's maybe not the most alluring thing anyone's seen for a shop window, but it does show the different tactics people are taking. Do be high-tech or do be traditional? And really, this is kind of a fusion of both, I would say. Again, look, Optical in Korea, they've taken a very sort of high-tech approach to their store, and sales have rocketed in this because they made it much more interactive. They encouraged people to come in and use interactive touch screens and actually model glasses themselves. So it appealed to people's sense of vanity, a sense of being able to sort of share things online, and that's been especially successful for them. Then there's gender segmentation. There's a couple of examples here from Australia. Manland. So IKEA's answer to making their store more engaging in Sydney was to remove the Sheilas from the equation. So here you can see the guys can hang out together with free hot dogs, Xbox consoles, pinball machines, and watch sports on TV. And this being Australia, that's not the only example. Shirt Bar is a proposition which mixes shirt retailing with principles of whiskey, I think. Dark spirits and espresso. Women are permitted into this store. I presume that's part of the attraction, but they do not stock any clothes for them. So that's the idea of really embracing, another sector as being the way to engage people with retail. And maybe one of the forerunners of this was Topshop. One of the most famous examples of this was when they opened their store in New York. They started hosting roller skating evenings in 2010. So sort of, you've got a retail space, and this is a sort of general point about this. A lot of it at times is going to waste. We're talking about wasted resources. Yes, there's licensing issues, but if you've got a retail space, there's so much potential to use that space, in shoulder hours, in the evenings, and for other events. Staying on the skating theme, a nice example of this is something we saw in Porto Alegre in Brazil. So Complex, this is part skate store, part skate park as well, and that's proven really successful. And it also has really good views of the city as well, so that's got a sort of multiple proposition, which is doing very well. And you can get some other interesting examples from airports. Singapore's Changi Airport, the largest slide in the world. So if you spend $30, you get to have a ride down that. We talked about this concept of reward, and I think that's a really good example of that. And mixed propositions, contrast is another appealing thing as well. This is in Tokyo, Mercedes-Benz store with a cross-promotion with Lacoste, which is proving very engaging as well. I'll raise the proposition of whether these kind of contrasts can work elsewhere. And again, looking at destination retail, we're all familiar with mall culture, but I guess the sort of second wave of mall culture is to be found in Asia Pacific, particularly in Singapore. So here's an example of a mall with a permanent art gallery on its lower level. Probably a bit more sophisticated and interesting than Debbie Gibson or something like that, which is in the United States. And then pop-up retail is obviously something we talked about earlier. But that's a way of instilling a sense of surprise and sort of breaking away from the over-familiarity of endless chains and the same stores being familiar on the high street all the time, which we looked at right at the start. So just to sort of summarise some of the things we've looked at in that section about how to engage consumers, if you will. Being positive, as Lee talked about talking about Tesco versus Sainsbury's, it really pays off not to talk about numbers and have percentage signs everywhere. And if you are going to discount, I think there's different ways to do it. Limited time areas or secret goods or whatever it may be, one-off editions, in-store exclusives, that kind of thing is a better form of exclusivity. And again, the idea of trying to become more of a sort of leisure destination away. And people have stopped spending on so many areas of leisure when we think about recorded product and things like that. There's an opportunity for retail to try and tap into some of that leisure pound, if you like. And combining high-tech with customer service as well. One thing that's sort of come up quite a few times, particularly when we talk to colleagues in the States, this idea of showrooming, where people are using stores as shop windows and saying, oh, it's great to go in here, try it out, trial it, and I'm just going to buy it online from somebody else. Now, that's obviously something that has to be countered with, recognising the fact that someone's come into your store to try something out and recognising that perhaps with a further discount online, which might feel a bit ridiculous to the sort of traditional notion of someone going in store, but I think that's something that has to be explored. Let's look at how, mobile connectivity, what that means. Because we talk about online versus offline, that doesn't really make much sense, but the point is now online is more likely to be on the go and possibly near a high street store than it was previously. So we look across consumer data we've got from the States, from the UK. Using tablets or using mobile phones to shop is becoming pretty established amongst young people. eBay, just over a year ago, started reporting, it's getting very strong sales itself. This idea of m-commerce is really working for them. And almost a third of UK consumers are actually sort of making price comparisons on smartphones whilst out and about shopping. And people are getting very used to the idea of, connectivity in terms of where they are. People are using geolocation technology. So the question is, what are retailers doing? Now, you praised Sainsbury's earlier. I mean, now it might be this might be a sort of point where we actually criticise them a bit. So what are we going to do with this mobile technology? What can we do? Well, this is quite a sort of passive approach. The idea that we're going to put carts in, allow shopping carts to allow you to watch a tablet whilst you're shopping in a kind of Stepford Wives sort of zombie fashion. I mean, that's not a particularly engaging thing to do. So let's look at some other examples of what people might be able to do. Something like Foursquare's, still perceived as quite niche. The idea of, rewarding someone for physically checking in and sort of marrying the digital world with the physical world. But we start looking at these numbers. I mean, for something burgeoning, I think these are quite impressive. 15 million people worldwide, 1.5 million check-ins, 0.6 million businesses using this. And perhaps Groupon is like the best example of how we've been able to sort of connect with people to get people to react more impulsively in terms of leisure and making something social. So obviously that angle is there for retail as well, and we're seeing examples of this all around the world. This is an Argentine sort of variation on this gear local, basically directing you to what's available in your vicinity to help you tap into impulse culture or socializing culture. Let's look at the phenomenon of consumers being on the move, because we are seeing sort of rapid rates of urbanization and people working longer into their lives as well. The idea that we're all going to retire at 65 is finished. So people are going to be on the go, continuing to work, and we continue to buy new products. Now, part of what that means is, just pausing to look at the idea of the sort of aging population. Part of what that means is, it's a great opportunity for certain retailers. It's bad news if you're selling long-haul holidays because you're used to having that kind of retirement target market. It's really good news if you're Pret-a-Manger, or if you're Boots, if you're selling cosmetics, or if you're selling fashion, because people are carrying on to work, carrying on to compete. So it's creating sort of, not new retail markets, but prolonging them and sort of spreading their demographic appeal. But in terms of targeting consumers, obviously Tesco was the first brand to start doing sort of virtual shopping walls in this regard, but real opportunity to target people on the go. People are going to want to shop and buy when they're on the go. They're also going to be quite impulsive and expect things to be back at home when they're there. Now we're starting to see retailers tap into this. So something like Argos's collect service, really kind of meets that need. But consumers are going to become more demanding in terms of wanting to be able to buy at all times, wanting to sort of have more freedom of delivery time or collection. And we're seeing some sort of novel approaches to this as well. It's not just buying whilst you wait. If you're a retailer and someone's waiting for a service, can you offer another service, or can someone do something else there? So I really like the synergy between this fact that here in Bahrain you can get your car checked out, and at the same time you can sort of service yourself in that regard and sort of work out at the gym. So there's quite a nice synergy around that, I think. Vending. Now, vending's not doing particularly well in the UK. In Japan, it's almost a way of life. That's the ratio of vending machines to people in Japan. But I think has huge potential. I mean, part of the problem in the West, I think, is we haven't really moved on from selling products which are bad for you. I mean, vending's like too readily associated with cigarettes or carbonated drinks. So perhaps we are seeing like interesting niche things. Like there's a company in Germany which started making books which fitted perfectly into cigarette vending machines on campuses. So we are seeing little novel things here and there. But there's a lot more potential to try and sort of sell healthier products from vending machines and push that along. Again, the States, the value of the market is quite impressive, but they're having the same problems. It's too fixated on selling unhealthy products or having that legacy or that association. Something more interesting is the idea that vending can become a lot more customized. So this BioSource vending machine allows, it tailors basically the mix of its product to your nutritional needs, your body weight. So there is, intelligent vending machines can do so much more to recognise the individual. Another thing we're seeing is vending machines having much more of a sort of social angle. So Coca-Cola's done loads of great stuff with this. Most of it not really in Europe or the States, but they've done things like in Australia. They sort of had the campaign where you could personalise cans and get your name or a friend's name on it, which sounds quite lame, but it quickly turns vending into a sort of quick gift machine. And they also did a campaign in Argentina where, I hope this isn't going to be on the next slide, it might be actually, I'm talking about it already, but they did a campaign in Argentina where you had to climb on someone's shoulders to be able to sort of reach the drink, but that allowed you to get 2 drinks. You paid for one and got one free. Now, a gimmick, but I think it sort of shows that, vending machines have the potential to be, have a social dimension as well. That's what I've just been talking about, yeah. And also in Japan they did the charitable vending machines as well. So obviously there's a lot of cash points that do that. It's quite annoying. You go to a cash point and you'll be asked if you want to give to some kind of charity, usually in a language you don't understand when you're abroad. But I think it can work with vending machines. We saw a really interesting variation in Sao Paulo where, yes, you had images of chocolate bars, different carbonated drinks, but then you had images of street children. And basically it's just a situation where you can, press A4 and that's going to give money to a street child charity. So it's a more private form of charity, if you like. And we do see a lot of reactions. People like to be seen to give, but they don't like being asked to give in public. So I think there is, maybe stopping thinking about vanity in that regard, there is potential with that kind of more private charitable vending. Right, let's look at service and whether people want automation or whether they do want a degree of human contact. Well, just generally, when we talk to consumers, people do want human contact. And there's a bit of a sort of scandal here in the sense that when we do brand research at Mintel, the brands which always come out with the highest scores for customer satisfaction or customer service are brands like Amazon, where you're not having any direct human contact. So if you're making an investment in people, you need to sort of make it count. Then again, lots of food service companies, lots of retailers are, as we know, particularly in this country, really going towards this idea of automated self-service. Then again, technology has been explored elsewhere in services, providing a bit more privacy. So, I remember we've talked to people like Harrods before about wine vending, and, maybe rather than having a sommelier or an expert to sort of recommend a particular wine to someone, if you're sort of inexperienced or if you're young, maybe you want a more private experience. You would rather just sample something from a vending machine and just have a little shot of it and make your own decision in that way. This is a similar principle behind the Shiseido's concept store here. So they have private booths where consumers can go and test out products themselves, and avoiding that intimidation factor, which is sometimes associated with service in the beauty sector, something that comes out in our attitudinal surveys. Okay, you can also take a high-tech approach to service, as done by TeamLab here. Basically just allowing you to explore things yourself, not wait for in-store recommendations. The items you picked up are sort of matched on screen with items which might match them. The great thing for this, it provides the store with almost with loyalty card style data where they're able to keep a record of how many times an item's been browsed compared to how many times it's been sold. And you know whether the certain match suggestions they're making actually work and make that connection. So that's the sort of high-tech approach. And also people are looking at service in terms of efficiency and in terms of payments. So a lot of different retailers around the world at the moment are sort of exploring different issues of contactless payments and how do we speed up that area. Can you pay as you're going around the store, which is being explored by Walmart here. These are actually official pictures from Walmart's website, which is interesting. But that's the payment options they're exploring. And I think perhaps the most interesting thing we've seen recently on Inspire is this idea of combining the two. Combining digital efficiency with traditional service. So Neiman Marcus basically developed apps where you can arrange and schedule and know who's in store if you have your favorite store person or someone you've had a relationship with before. And you can actually sort of arrange to sort of be guided around the store by them or them to recommend different products to you. So that's a nice marriage of traditional, very old-fashioned service with sort of modern efficiency. Okay, the final area to look at is the sort of burgeoning rental culture. Bicycles being a sort of good example of that. Not at the expense of bicycle retail, definitely not. But you know, I think sort of the bicycle is the sort of rental thing at the moment, maybe. And it's really happening around big ticket items. I mean, there's a bit of a sea change in this country with, obviously, housing is shifting towards rental rather than ownership in this country. The practicalities of growing urbanisation and growing fuel costs also lend itself to a rental proposition rather than a retail proposition. And when we talk to consumers at Mintel, we're definitely finding lots of different areas they're interested in rental. You know, this is obviously, you know, tied to the idea of people not actually purchasing houses, maybe renting them, but people are interested in renting DIY equipment more and more rather than purchasing. And this can happen in any sector. You know, we've seen fashion retailing has been really strong in this country because of its affordability, and maybe because we've got cash freed up from other leisure sectors moving to this. But the proposition of beg, borrow, or steal is obviously that, you know, there's a huge rental market for accessories, for shoes, for handbags, for jewellery, things that are going to sort of change your outfits that you're not going to use regularly. Again, I mean, you might argue that mobile phone tariffs, you know, this is a form of extended rental rather than retail in itself. But again, it's another sector where consumers are interested in just the concept of renting rather than actually owning the handset. So really, I just want to close by looking at some recommendations we came up with as a group at Mintel about what areas we thought the high street might be able to improve its proposition. And, you know, one area is, you know, don't be generic. Can you be independent? You know, can you experiment with that? We saw Starbucks do that with, you know, having debranded independent stores as well. Can you, I mean, obviously supermarkets have done this in the past as well, sort of welcoming concessions for local butchers, local fishmongers, independents, but can you have that sense of distinction, that sense of localism by welcoming in local people as well? People are there not just to look at things, people are there to sort of touch them, feel them, interact them, trial them. Can we make stores more sensory? Is there more of a chance to sort of explore and interact with products as well? And also interact with other people. We've seen all that data saying that shopping is a social phenomenon. That needs to be exploited more. You've got a space there which can be used in that regard. The Neiman Marcus example is a really good example of this, but people do want, you know, you need to make something of human contact. If you're going to invest in having people in your store, make that a valuable tenet of your operation. But also people do want automation. They want to sort of explore and navigate things themselves around the clock. again, the principles of creating destination retail, really. You've got a space which can be exploited. And the high street can do this. This doesn't just have to be the shopping mall. It seems to be the preserve of shopping malls. But, you know, we have things like Christmas markets popping up everywhere. You know, there's potential to do all kinds of things. The potential for Nike to set up a basketball court in the middle of the high street and, you know, trial its different products or launch things in that way. You know, there's a lot more things can be done to engage people and engage the local community, put something back, mobilise people together on the high street, make it a sort of fixed, you know, the new village green, if you like. Again, it needs to be accessible as well, though, and vending can be part of that, as we said, if we try and sort of re-examine what can be offered by vending. But more services of the type offered by Carrefour to prolong your visit, make it easier for you to stay. Again, we talked about mobile connectivity. Well, this really calls for retailers to get better profiles of their customers. So if I'm walking down the street, they have something better than the algorithms which might recommend something to me on a website, and they're able to say, you know, we have this in your size, or, you know, we have a ticket for this movie, you know, whatever's available, that you need to sort of tap into passing custom in that way and make it an opt-in thing rather than something which could become annoying. And also, retailers need to club together more, you know, and stop fighting against each other and cooperate to a degree to provide sort of virtual high street maps in that regard. Again, this is really about speed. People don't want to queue to pay, and if they are going to queue, give them an option to buy something else or be entertained by something else. Can queuing ever become a pleasure? And reward people for visiting, even if they're not buying. Acknowledge the fact that they visited you. Again, an element of surprise. I mean, part of this is doing more with station. I think there's opportunities to do more at sort of transport hubs as well, sort of capture the transhumers. Part of that is about embracing sort of technology to make things more immediate and more accessible. Again, there's also space to be exploited. And again, there's a lot of community value in turning things which are eyesores into temporary sponsored pop-up shops and things which engage the community in that way. Again, get personal. We touched on this before and talking about profiling people as they're walking around the street if they're sort of connected on a device. But it's also about taps into customer service as well. Really sort of know your customer as an individual. And finally, the rental areas we explored. I think this shouldn't really necessarily be perceived as a threat. If that's the way it's going, that's the way it's going. You can't really turn the tide of certain items. And I think there's an opportunity for more retailers to embrace sort of extend into sort of rental areas as well. Thank you very much.
That was terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really, really good. Really inspirational. Idea, challenges, lots of thoughts in there. It's great. Questions for both great speakers. There's a lot of convergence between ideas, I thought, actually. How many times can you mention Sainsbury's and Nike and I now understand why when I was at Sainsbury's, I always used to wonder why the mobile phone never worked in store, which it didn't. I mean, really didn't do what I was Sainsbury's, nothing ever worked. I now know why, just so you can't actually compare the prices while you're in there. They were thinking ahead. It was great. Question for Richard or for Lee, please. Please.
I think we're asking a lot of retail stores in the current environment. We're asking them to innovate, to personalize the experience, to offer excellent customer service, personal experience at it, and to compete with the online at the time they are not surviving, and at the time there is a recession. So are we actually giving a valid recommendation to these retail stores to survive?
Well, I think it is difficult, I agree, but I mean, as regards customer service, I think there's definitely an opportunity to improve that. We've got a very competitive job market, you know, and I think there is a sort of element of survival of the fittest in that, and I think there's possibility to sort of raise levels of customer service because of that, not make, you know, being a shop assistant, you know, elevating the sort of value of that job. I think that's something you can do. People are getting a lot of leisure stuff for free, and I think there's a, you know, opportunity, you know, there's not some people have got lots of money to spend on leisure, but an opportunity to sort of step into that gap and provide new opportunities for people to spend on leisure. So they're two sort of areas of opportunity, but yeah, I take your point, it's a difficult environment. And this certainly the presentation wasn't really focused on this being recession related. It's just more, you know, can we spice things up and make things, you know, a bit more interesting, because things do feel a bit tired and a bit ubiquitous. And certainly I think a lot of the interesting examples we've seen are coming from outside the UK and outside North America as well.
So, sort of a previous client of mine was Virgin Media and their stores, and they had a similar problem where the stores themselves are fairly dull, basically. There's no reason, and they listed themselves, there's no actual reason to go into one, because you can, it's a lot easier actually just to buy the phone online or to get your broadband coverage. And one of the ways that we work with them to create much more of an experience wasn't through sort of massive sort of infrastructure changes, it was actually using mobile. So how could we use things like augmented reality to bring the products to life, kind of just simple things, using QR codes to get you some more kind of additional content, and to connect you with, rather than the fact that you're buying a black box, that kind of connects you to a pipe which gives you TV, almost like highlighting the amazing content you're going to get from it. And kind of, it's relatively simple and relatively cheap. But it's a way of achieving it.
But a lot of the ideas are coming from outside this country, aren't they? One was I saw the other day was Topshop, who in Russia, I think it was, where you could sort of basically try the clothes on without actually trying them on. So you stand in front of the mirror and it would put them on you. If you're female, by the way. It's going to get complicated. But I mean, there's that sort of, I go right back to the retail experience, actually, you know, merging technology and service. It's just absolutely brilliant. I mean,
there's a real opportunity for gifting around that.
It is.
You know, people knowing, you know, the exact measurements, colours and tastes of, you know, friends and partners often. And they don't. And, you know, that's a real hindrance to buying clothes, you know, as a gift.
Emma?
I think online has been, has obviously taken off and become quite intelligent, and it looks at what your purchasing patterns are and then can tailor accordingly and give you suggestions. With the new cookie laws that are coming in, do you think that will change the shift a little bit in terms of, you know, I don't know how far people will take it and whether people will go to the letter of the law, but will that affect sort of that online experience and perhaps give more power back to the street?
If they can use revived traditional customer services, sort of recognise that in a sort of formal conversational way about people's purchasing history, yeah, that could be an opportunity. I can't speak about the sort of regulation side of it, but I know consumers aren't really bothered by this much. You know, consumers are kind of willing to give up their information as long as they get something in return.
The rules will be you've got to actually get people to opt in to using cookies to retarget.
And they seem very keen to do that if they can get refunded.
Yeah.
So that obviously concerns me, because I'm thinking as a more destination and work with a lot of retailers, how do you kind of make things more tailored towards the consumer online? And then I was just thinking, does that give power more to offline, perhaps doing things in stores where you can mix and match a bit like the audio-visual kind of approach?
Well, I totally agree with that. Another thing that occurred to me is that, you know, high street stores have an opportunity to surprise people. Now, I like going to charity shops a lot. I'm not wearing anything at the moment, but I do. I do. And partly it's the element of surprise. And I think that is an opportunity for the high street, because a lot of people argue that algorithms and recommendations, they're kind of really destroying independence, and they're destroying that, you know, creativity. So in our digital detox presentation we've done, there's Slavoj Žižek, the sort of pop philosopher. He talks about how, you know, consumers don't get lost anymore in life, because you're just living a life where you like this, therefore you're like this, and it's destroying creativity. So you don't get lost or make mistakes and get new ideas.
Less serendipity.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what TK Maxx are making at the moment, isn't it? Yeah. More creativity in shopping.
Yeah, if you like this, you're always going to be channeled down that direction. You're missing
Other
out
questions from this side, please, so we can actually force away from the corner over there. Any questions? Yeah.
I have a question. Thanks for the presentations. There's levels of creativity there. With so many slides, one can get lost in what might be the future. Can I ask you both, what one trend, one piece of creativity do you think will be here, you know, for the long term? You look back in 10 years and say, wow, that's a really big thing.
I'd
Another
say,
question. That's a tough one. That's not nice.
blurring
I'm
of,
gonna put you on the
I
spot
mean,
first.
leisure and retail sort of being the same thing. I mean, you might argue that's already happened with the sort of the idea of, a shopping mall which has got a cinema in it, but I mean the sort of the blurring of, brands and boundaries and that disappearing, and, it almost being a one-stop shop, leisure and retail are the same things.
I'll probably say that in terms of that sort of social connectivity, it's on and offline spaces that are less about just trying to flog things, it's more about actually creating an experience for what that brand is about.
You didn't ask me, but I believe it's going to be about the merger of retail and technology, and it's how those two converge. I think we don't see anything yet in terms of the power of mobile technology and how it's going to change the way we interact and shop and everything else. And I think it's going to be how retailers absorb that technology and really make it work for them. It doesn't matter what form retail they are, whether they're from pubs to clubs to stores, whatever. It's how they do that that's going to make change. Then there's other 9 as well, which I would like to know. There's Stuart.
Yes, the question I had is, the stat that you raised about how high streets are becoming very similar in terms of their experience and their look and feel, how do you feel that the main, and sorry to sort of use this, but the main supermarkets are having such a stranglehold on not just the independents, but also the way in which they're creating this one-stop shop convenience mentality, which is what we all want, what we all desire as consumers, but that's sort of killing the opportunity for organisations to engage in different ways, because actually if convenience is the main driver and price behind that, how do we actually break that? What's the challenge for us all as retailers?
Well, it's also something different. They've got it sewn up in a way. If you trust a brand, obviously people are bad-mouthing Tesco at the moment. If you trust a brand as much as people have trusted Tesco in the past, you'll bank with them, you'll buy school uniforms from them. It's just, let's get it done in one go. The challenge is, can you be more than a retailer? So I mentioned, going back to my sort of fusion of leisure and retail argument, I certainly think that's one area. I'd argue a lot of those supermarkets do a good job on customer service, so it's not necessarily that easy to get an edge on in that way.
I think it's also that idea of standing for something, giving actually some of the reason to go there. So if you're not perhaps quite as convenient or quite as cheap, you get something else there, whether it's the fact that it's local or there's fantastic service or they give you bites with traders, it's that sort of thing.
It's your point about giving something back,
It's
not just
making it
price.
better and easier for them,
There's not, I guess you could
They
argue.
are, at the end of the day, they are unbelievably powerful. Sainsbury's, we have 18 billion turning up every week. And so whether they flog them something else rather than that, it's incredible power as the customers coming to you.
It's quite price, I guess the sort of differentiation between all of those brands, there are other things, like, Co-op would say it's the ethical option, but it is quite sort of price-led, as we saw in the argument between Tesco and Sainsbury's. So can you do something else to differentiate yourself in that regard?